Sam Morgan sat in that glow, sharpening the edge of a whittling knife, his broad hands moving with the rhythm of a man who wasn't carving with so much as carving time. The figure in his lap had no clear form, just a lump of pine softened by calloused fingers. He wasn't in a hurry to shape it. Truth was, most days, he wasn't in a hurry to do much at all. He hadn't always been this way. Before Abigail died, Sam used to laugh, used to hum while he worked. There were bees then, and chickens scratching near the coop, and flowers. God, how Abigail loved her little garden. Wild tulips, soft-bloomed prairie roses, blue flax. After she passed, the garden grew into weeds, then snow, then nothing. He never had the heart to plant again. Outside, the storm thickened its grip on the land. Snow fell not in flurries, but in slow, deliberate sheets, covering the world inch by inch. Sam glanced at the fire, stirred it once with the iron poker, and leaned back in his chair with a long, empty breath. His bones ached with the kind of cold that didn't come from weather. That particular chill lived deeper, in the chest, where memories of laughter had once warmed him. It was a quiet sort of pain, the kind that didn't scream but settled into your skin like dust in old corners. He reached for his cup, black coffee, cooled long ago, and took a swallow out of habit more than thirst. Then he heard it. 3 knocks. Slow. Not wind tapping branches, not a raccoon scratching at the sidewall. Human. He stilled. A 4th knock followed, hesitant. A pause. Then another. Sam stood, joints protesting as he moved. He hadn't had a visitor in days, not with the road buried under snowdrifts taller than a man's chest. He stepped to the door, unlatched the iron bolt, and opened it with the caution of a man who'd learned not to expect anything good from the world anymore. And yet, there she stood. A woman wrapped in a frayed coat 3 sizes too big, its hem crusted with ice. Her hat was gone, hair tangled and damp from snow. Behind her, huddled beneath a single threadbare quilt, were 3 children, no taller than his knee, bundled in wool and fear. Her eyes met his. Wide, uncertain, but still bright with something that hadn't yet surrendered. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Sam felt the plea in her breath, in the way her knees seemed close to buckling but hadn't yet. He stepped aside without a word. She guided the children in with stiff arms and murmured reassurances too quiet to hear. Sam closed the door behind them, bolting it against the storm once more. They stood near the hearth, silent, dripping, the smallest child, golden-haired and wide-eyed, holding a soggy rag doll to her chest like a lifeline. Sam added a log to the fire. Sparks leapt, and light bloomed across the room, painting warmth onto their pale faces. Still, they said nothing. Finally, the woman's voice came. Low. Hoarse. We walked 3 days. The wagon wheel broke east of Bitter Ridge. I couldn't carry them all at once. Sam nodded, more to acknowledge than to answer. She continued, voice steadier now. I'm Rachel. These are mine, Finn, Theo, and Sadie. The boys nodded shyly. Sadie just blinked, doll clutched tighter. You lost? He asked, voice gravelly from disuse. No, she said. Left. That one word held multitudes. Sam didn't press further. He motioned to the chairs near the hearth. Sit. Dry off. I'll fetch something warm. They did as told. He returned minutes later with broth, simple and thin, but hot. The children didn't wait. They devoured the bowls with quiet urgency, Rachel watching them instead of eating her own. You should eat, Sam said. I will, she replied. But her eyes stayed on her children. He studied her then, not with judgment, but with the cautious attention of someone who'd once known what it was to be needed and hadn't been since. Her face was sharp with hunger and pride. He could tell it cost her something to accept his help, but more to ask it. Once the children finished, they curled against one another on the braided rug, Sadie between the boys. Sam fetched an extra quilt from the cedar chest and laid it gently over them. Rachel watched him closely. You alone here? She asked, not unkindly. He gave a small nod. Been that way 2 winters now. Her eyes softened. I'm sorry. He shrugged. Storms come. Sometimes they don't leave. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled and popped, filling the space between them. Then, she said, almost in a whisper, I tried to go west. To Montana City. Had family waiting, or so I thought. My husband, he turned back when we ran low on food. Said I'd made my bed coming out here. Sam looked at her then, fully. He left you. In winter. With children. She gave a small nod. There was no storm then. Just silence. Sam didn't answer. Instead, he poured her a fresh cup of coffee and slid it across the table. She took it with both hands, letting the heat soak into her skin. Her fingers trembled slightly. He didn't ask if from cold or something deeper. You can stay, he said quietly, till the road clears. She met his gaze again. There was something unreadable in her face, part hesitation, part relief. Thank you, she whispered. No need. Not yet. He returned to his chair and picked up the half-shaped wood in his lap. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It had grown companionable, the kind that doesn't require filling. He noticed, suddenly, the way the children breathed in rhythm. The way Rachel tucked her coat closer, not to shut him out, but to keep herself steady. The fire popped again. The storm raged outside. But inside, for the first time in many months, Sam felt the air shift. Not warm yet, but warming. He watched Rachel as she sipped her coffee, her eyes tracing the flicker of flame. She wasn't resting, not fully, but the guard around her had loosened, just slightly. Enough to let in light. Enough to let him wonder if perhaps, come spring, the weeds outside might be coaxed into bloom again. But that was a thought for later. For now, the snow fell, the candle flickered, and the small cabin held 5 lives that had, by fate or storm, come to share its breath. Sam didn't believe in miracles anymore. But he did believe in doors that opened when they shouldn't have. And sometimes, that was enough. By morning, the storm had laid its fury down like a tired beast, blanketing the plains in a hush so deep it seemed the world was holding its breath. The snow shimmered with untouched grace, untouched except for the fading prints that led to Sam Morgan's door, faint signs of desperation now swallowed by sleep and warmth. Inside, the cabin smelled of ash, broth, and the faint sweetness of pine. Rachel stirred before the children, her eyes opening not with panic, but the cautious awareness of a woman who had trained herself to rise before trouble could. She sat up on the floor where she'd laid her thin coat for a pillow and reached instinctively toward the quilt-covered mound where her children lay. All 3 breathed in gentle syncopation, their cheeks flushed now with heat instead of cold. She rose carefully, avoiding the creaking boards near the hearth, and stepped into the kitchen corner, where Sam was already moving, quiet as the dawn, stirring a pot over low flames. You slept, he said without looking up. I tried. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. Thank you. For last night. He gave a slight nod, the kind that carried weight instead of words. He handed her a bowl of oats cooked thick with a pinch of salt and a spoon already warm from his hand. She took it with both hands and sat by the window, watching the horizon ease into pale blue. The sky seemed fragile, like if you breathed too hard it might shatter. Storms passed, Sam said. But the trail's gone. You won't find it for days. I'm not trying to find it. She didn't look at him when she said it, and he didn't ask her to. The children woke slowly, blinking into the golden light. Theo sat up first, rubbing his eyes with grimy fists, then Finn, who yawned like a cat and crawled toward the fire without a word. Sadie, smaller and softer than her brothers, stirred last, holding tight to the threadbare doll that hadn't left her grasp even through sleep. Come on, Rachel called softly. Wash up. There was no resistance. They moved toward the basin Sam had set near the back door, where a bucket of meltwater waited. They'd learned not to ask questions where survival was concerned. Sam watched them from a distance, noting the way Sadie leaned her head into Rachel's shoulder while Theo stood in front of the bucket, shivering but determined. These children, he realized, had already lived through more than most men he'd known. And Rachel wore her strength like a hidden seam in her dress. Nothing about her was loud, but everything about her was enduring. As the day warmed, Sam stepped outside to tend to the livestock. His boots broke the frozen crust of snow, and the cold bit at his cheeks. Inside the barn, he fed the animals, his movements slow and measured. His thoughts stayed with the people inside the cabin. Not just as guests now, but as a presence he couldn't ignore. When he returned, the cabin was changed in the smallest of ways. Rachel had swept the floor, laid out the children's wet clothes near the fire to dry, and mended the hem of one of his old shirts that had frayed at the cuff. She didn't ask permission. She simply moved with the care of someone who knew that restoring order was another way of praying. "You didn't have to," Sam said, stepping out of his coat. "I know," she replied, tying off her thread. "But it helped me feel like I belonged, at least for a minute." He studied her, the way her hands moved with purpose, the way her voice carried no bitterness, only clarity. He wondered when she'd last heard someone say she didn't need to earn her place. The children were less guarded now. After breakfast, Finn had found an old wooden horse on the shelf above the mantel, a toy Sam had carved long ago, never played with, kept more out of memory than use. "You make this?" Finn asked, holding it up. Sam nodded. "Years ago." "It's good," the boy said, inspecting it as if it were a treasure. "Can I show Sadie?" "You can keep it," Sam said. Finn grinned, rare and sudden. It struck something small and startling in Sam's chest. It felt like hearing a song he hadn't realized he missed. By afternoon, the cabin hummed with a quiet sort of life. Sam cut more wood while Rachel boiled water to wash the children's socks. Finn followed him outside to help stack kindling. They worked side by side without much conversation, though Finn asked about the axe, about the best trees for splitting, about how to tell good firewood from bad. Sam answered each question with the same calm rhythm he used with animals or tools. He noticed how quickly the boy watched and learned. Not just mimicking, but remembering. Inside, Rachel stood near the stove, stirring a pot with her left hand while Sadie clung to her skirt. Theo sat near the window, a small scrap of paper in his lap, attempting to draw the wooden horse with a piece of charcoal. The air was warmer now, not just from the fire, but from presence, from belonging. As evening fell, Rachel sat at the table, darning another sock, when Sam finally spoke what had sat on his tongue since morning. "You planning to go when the road clears?" She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers kept stitching, steady and precise. "I don't know," she said finally. "There's nowhere left that expects us." "You got people out west?" "I thought I did. A cousin in Deer Lodge. But she sent word she moved south. No address. No trail to follow." Sam nodded slowly. "There's work, if you wanted it. Mrs. Webb in town runs the store. She could use help come spring. She's fond of children." Rachel looked up at him, not with suspicion, but with a wary hope of someone unused to open doors that didn't lead to danger. "You offering us a place?" "I'm offering shelter," Sam said, "and maybe something steadier. You don't owe me for it. I just figure, this land's big enough for more than ghosts." She didn't smile, but something in her eyes shifted, like a thaw setting into the edges of a long winter. That night, the wind didn't howl. It whispered. The kind of whisper that lives in rocking chairs and lullabies and firelight shared between strangers learning how not to be. The children curled again beneath quilts. Rachel helped Sam wash the dishes, and their hands met briefly in the water, rough and calloused and full of stories neither had yet told. They didn't speak of it, but neither pulled away. Later, after all was quiet, Sam sat by the fire with the half-carved figure still in his lap. It had begun to resemble a fox now, lithe, watchful. He hadn't intended it to be that. But some things shaped themselves with time. Rachel stood near the window, her arms wrapped around her middle, watching the sky darken. "There's peace here," she said softly, "but it's the kind you earn, not borrow." Sam didn't answer. He didn't need to. She already knew he agreed. When she turned, he offered her the chair by the fire. She took it. Outside, the moon began its slow rise. Inside, the silence settled again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. The cradle of warmth they'd built together in one day held, against the cold that had once swallowed them both. And somewhere beyond the snow and the past, a new rhythm waited. One neither of them had expected. One worth staying to learn. The thaw didn't come in a single rush but in sighs, small moments where the frost released its grip a little more each day. The snow softened first near the well, then along the cabin's eaves where icicles wept themselves into puddles. Sam noticed it in the way the door no longer stuck, and the wind, once fierce and full of sorrow, now carried the scent of wet bark and far-off mud. Spring, like trust, didn't arrive with trumpets. It arrived in patience. Inside the cabin, the shift echoed louder. Sam had taken to carving again, not just out of habit or loneliness, but for the children. Finn, in particular, was fascinated by the craft. He watched with wide, unblinking focus as Sam's knife shaped the pine with strokes that were both sure and soft. Sometimes, the boy would sit on a stool beside him with his own stubby blade and scrap wood, mimicking the motions with the intensity of someone who understood the act was sacred. "That one looks like a rabbit," Finn said one morning, leaning over Sam's shoulder as shavings piled on the floor like curled feathers. "It's supposed to," Sam murmured. "You make them all from memory?" Some come from nothing. Just hands remembering something the mind forgot." Finn blinked as if trying to understand how hands could hold memories. Then he smiled, all teeth and sunshine. "I'm gonna make a bear. You'll need patience for that." "I got patience," Finn said proudly. "Mama says I wait better than Theo." In the corner, Theo scowled from behind a worn book that Rachel had read to them the night before. "Do not." Sadie sat by the window, humming softly to her doll. She had named it Abigail, after asking Sam what his wife's name had been. He hadn't planned to tell her, but she'd asked so sincerely, so tenderly, as though knowing the name might bring some lost goodness into the world again. Rachel had begun to change, too, though her shifts were quieter than the land's. She still moved like someone expecting the floor to collapse beneath her at any moment, but there were cracks in the caution now, moments when her smile arrived without resistance or when her eyes lingered a second longer on Sam than they had before. She had taken over the cooking, and though her meals were plain, they held the kind of warmth that could only come from someone who put thought into the simplest things. Sam often found himself eating slower, savoring. Not just the food, but the gesture, the care behind it. Once, when she brought him a bowl of stew, she paused before setting it down. "You eat too little," she said gently. "I eat what I need. You need more than you think." It wasn't about food. He knew that. She knew he knew. That night, he finished the fox carving and placed it quietly on the mantel beside the wooden horse. In the morning, it was gone from the shelf and resting near Sadie's pillow. Outside, the land continued its slow resurrection. The creek began to murmur beneath its brittle shell. Trees, still bare, held a sheen of promise in their buds. Animals stirred in the woods, footprints pressed into the softening snow. The birds returned, tentative and few. One afternoon, while the boys chased each other through the melting yard and Sadie napped on the porch with Abigail nestled under her chin, Rachel and Sam found themselves alone in the kitchen. She was kneading dough, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied back with a strip of cloth. He was repairing the hinge on the pantry door, watching her more than the task at hand. "Never figured you for bread making," he said. "I didn't either," she replied. "But I learned. The way women do when they're waiting for someone else to come back and don't know if they will." Sam tightened the screw in the hinge. "He gone long before you left?" Her hands didn't stop. "He left long before I admitted he had." She wiped her fingers on her apron. "He was one of those men who only love you when you need nothing from them." Sam nodded. "There's plenty of them." She glanced at him, and something passed between them, an understanding, aged and earned. "You ever wish you'd left instead of stayed?" she asked, voice quieter now. He met her eyes. "Sometimes. But I'd have carried her absence either way. At least here, I know the weight of it." She looked down, pressed her palm into the dough. "Grief's strange. You think it'll hollow you out, but it fills you instead. Makes a room in you you never planned to furnish. And when someone walks into it, you're not sure if you should ask them to stay," Sam finished. Rachel gave a small smile, sad but genuine. Exactly that. They didn't speak after that. The silence between them had shifted. Less absence, more invitation. That night, Theo woke with a fever. He whimpered through his dreams, brow damp, cheeks flushed. Rachel held him against her chest, whispering soothing words even as fear flickered in her eyes. Sam didn't speak. He fetched cool cloths, boiled water, checked his stores for dried willow bark. He sat beside Rachel through the worst of it, watching as she rocked her son and whispered stories about green meadows and birdsong. "You can sleep," he said once, his voice low. "I won't," she replied. "Not until he's through it." "He will be." "How do you know?" "Because you're still here." She didn't thank him, but her fingers brushed his as he handed her another cloth, and the touch lingered. Theo's fever broke before dawn. When the boy finally drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, Rachel turned to Sam with eyes rimmed in exhaustion and something close to trust. "You didn't have to sit up." "I wanted to." She nodded, and without another word, leaned against his shoulder. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let herself be held by something steadier than fear. In the days that followed, everything felt different. Not louder or faster, but more alive. The children clung to the rhythm they'd built. Mornings by the fire, afternoons exploring the land with Sam, evenings tucked close beside Rachel with her stories and lullabies. Their laughter came easier now, less like survival and more like childhood. Sam started carving animals just to see their reactions. Deer, owls, badgers. Finn declared he would one day have a whole forest of wooden creatures. Sadie asked for a butterfly. Theo wanted a wolf. One morning, Sadie wandered into Sam's workshop behind the barn. She didn't speak, just climbed onto the bench beside him and watched as he shaped a block of wood into wings. "Is it for me?" she asked softly. "If you want it." She nodded solemnly. "It's pretty." "Do you remember what butterflies mean?" he asked, pausing in his work. She shook her head. "They mean change. From something that crawls to something that flies." Sadie stared at the carving, then at him. "Mama says we changed. She says we were scared worms and now we're family." Sam smiled. "That sounds about right." As April pressed in with thaw and bloom, the cabin took on a new kind of warmth, one that couldn't be blamed on firewood alone. The children referred to Sam not as Mr. anymore, but simply Sam. Once, Finn slipped and called him Papa, then froze, cheeks red, apology on his lips. Sam said nothing, just reached out and rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. Finn grinned and didn't correct himself. One evening, Rachel stood in the doorway of the workshop, watching as Sam sanded the butterfly's wings to a fine curve. "You're good with them," she said. "They make it easy." She stepped inside, brushing her fingers along the carved shapes on the shelves. "They talk about you all day. Theo says you know the names of every tree." He exaggerates. Still, he believes it. She turned to face him. "They're healing. Faster than I expected. They're children. They know how to trust again." She nodded, thoughtful. "I wish I could say the same." Sam set the carving down and looked at her, not with expectation, but with the patient regard of someone who understood that some doors open slowly, and only from the inside. "I don't want to replace anyone," he said, "but if you needed someone who stays." He let the rest hang there, unfinished, like a line of verse waiting for her breath. Rachel didn't move, but her voice came steady. "I don't need saving, Sam." "I know," he said. "I just want to be somewhere you don't have to do it alone." Her eyes filled, not tears, not quite, but the glisten of a soul that's been seen and still welcomed. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire crackled low, Sam stepped outside to watch the stars return. Rachel joined him, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, silence between them. The moon was rising over the ridge, casting silver over the snow-softened land. In the distance, the first frogs sang. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," he said, "but not as much as what's growing here." She leaned against him then, not because she was cold, but because she could. And inside, on the windowsill, the wooden butterfly waited for morning. The air had turned expectant, like something distant had stirred awake. Spring had begun its slow exhale across the land, leaving soft buds on the cottonwoods and painting faint green across the valley floor. The Morgan homestead, though no one had yet spoken the name out loud, breathed easier with the season. Days passed in quiet rhythm. Eggs collected, bread baked, children barefoot in wet grass. Sam carved with one window open now, his hands working smoother than before, his mind less haunted. Rachel spent mornings in the garden patch they dug together, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tangled in the wind. The children called the creek theirs. Sadie had a favorite tree. Nothing thunderous marked their days, but there was a fullness in the stillness, like being inside a held breath that no longer needed to be released. And then came the rider. It was late afternoon when the dust rose like a warning from the southern trail. Sam saw it from the barn first, a thin line of earth disturbed beneath a pale sky. One rider. Fast. No wagon. No gear. Just a man on a dark gelding, cutting the land like it owed him something. By the time the horse slowed near the fence line, the children had gathered on the porch. Sam stepped in front of them instinctively, calm but solid. Rachel emerged from the cabin with a damp cloth in her hand and stilled the moment she saw the man dismount. He was tall, angular, his face sharp in a way that suggested charm once used like a blade. Dust clung to his coat, but his boots were polished. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Rachel," he said with mock surprise. "Well, ain't this sweet?" She didn't speak. "Been a long ride," he went on. "Heard tell you were here. Took me a few towns to find the right whisper. But I reckon you weren't tryin' to be too hidden. Figured a woman like you wouldn't last out here long without attaching herself to someone." Sam stepped forward, voice even. "Who are you?" The man turned to him, looked him up and down. "Randall Byrne. Husband. Father. Depending on the day." Rachel's jaw tightened. The cloth in her hand trembled before she tucked it into her apron. She didn't move toward Randall. Didn't blink either. "You're not welcome here," Sam said, calm but final. Randall gave a soft laugh, too smooth. "I believe I still have a say. Those are my children, aren't they? Looks like you've been keeping them from their rightful family." "You left them to die," Rachel said, her voice clear, steady. "You turned your back when we needed a fire, a meal, a home." "I made a mistake," he said, hands raised in mock surrender. "What man hasn't? But they're still mine, by law." "No court recognizes abandonment as a claim to kin," Sam said. Randall looked at him long, slow, lips twisting into a grin that had once likely charmed saloon girls and card dealers alike. "And you're who exactly? Her lawyer? Or just the poor fool she latched onto next?" Sam didn't answer. He didn't have to. Rachel stepped beside him, her voice low but firm. "What do you want?" "Custody. My kids. My rights. You can stay if you want, but they come with me. And I'm taking them tomorrow." The children watched from behind the porch rail, wide-eyed and confused. Sadie clutched Abigail the doll to her chest like a lifeline. "You can't just take them," Rachel said. Randall's expression hardened. "I can, and I will. Don't make me bring the sheriff into it." He mounted his horse again, not in haste, but with the swagger of someone used to getting what he demanded. "You've had your little fairy tale. Time to wake up." He rode off without looking back. Dust swallowed his trail, but his words clung to the air like smoke. That evening, silence fell heavy in the cabin. The children didn't ask questions. They'd learned when to stay quiet. Rachel paced in the kitchen, her steps methodical, but her hands shook as she folded towels that didn't need folding. Sam sat at the table, sharpening his blade out of habit. "He can't take them," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "But he will. He'll bring papers or worse. He knows the kind of men who carry words like weapons." Sam nodded slowly. "We can fight him. But it won't be easy. Law favors the man with the claim, no matter how false. Her breath hitched. I won't marry again just to protect my children. I won't trade one prison for another. You wouldn't be. She looked at him then, eyes fierce beneath the sheen of fear. Even if you're kind, Sam, even if I trust you, that's still not freedom. I'm not offering marriage, he said. I'm offering to stand beside you. In front of him, if need be. She sat down across from him, her hands tightening in her lap. I thought we were safe. You were. You are. But shadows don't knock. They let themselves in. The next day, Randall returned, not alone. A man rode beside him, wearing a badge and a frown too neat to be real concern. Sheriff Malloy from the next town over. Known to some as just, known to others as bought. They dismounted without ceremony, the sheriff stepping forward with papers in his hand. Ma'am, I've been informed you've been keeping your children from their father. According to this petition, signed and sworn by Mr. Byrne here, the children are to be returned under temporary custody while the courts sort the rest. Rachel stepped onto the porch, her voice calm but shaking at the edges. He abandoned us. I have witnesses. He left us to die in the snow. You have proof of that? Sam stepped beside her. You've got half the town who saw her come out of that storm with nothing but will. She's worked, she's built a life here. Those children are alive because of her. The sheriff glanced at Randall, then at the cabin, then back at the paper. That may be. But a judge will decide. Until then, the children go with their father. Rachel's knees buckled slightly. Sam reached for her, steadied her. She didn't lean into him, but she didn't pull away. Then a voice rose from behind them. Mrs. Webb, the shopkeeper, arrived in her wagon, snow still clinging to her hem. That man's no father, she said loudly. He's a drifter and a liar. Ask around town. Ask Doc Hadley. Ask anyone who's watched that woman raise those children with grace while he rode off into a bottle. More voices followed. Doc Hadley, Pastor Elias, even young Ben Miller, the stable hand. They came not with weapons or shouts, but with presence, with truth. The sheriff, caught between paperwork and people, scratched his head. You'll need to take it to the courthouse, Mr. Byrne. I won't be dragging children off when half the town stands against it. Randall looked ready to spit fire, but he swallowed it down, sneering. Fine. But this isn't over. He rode off again, slower this time. The sheriff followed, grumbling something about judges and jurisdiction. The people stayed a while longer. They didn't celebrate. They simply stood close, offering nods and quiet comfort. Rachel thanked them, voice breaking. Sam watched her, steady and silent, heart full of something he didn't dare name yet. That night, Rachel stood by the fire, arms wrapped around herself. He'll be back, she said. With more papers. Stronger words. Sam nodded. Then we'll be stronger still. She looked at him then, not like a frightened woman, but like someone measuring the shape of hope against memory. I was going to leave, come spring. Take the children somewhere new. Somewhere without ghosts. You still can. She stepped closer. But maybe ghosts aren't the ones haunting me. Maybe it's the fear that nothing lasts. Sam reached into the drawer and pulled out something small. A wooden ring, simple and unadorned, carved with care. I made this, he said, before the snow melted. I didn't know if I'd give it to you. It's not a proposal. Just proof. That I believe in something lasting. She took it slowly, held it in her palm like a fragile bird. Thank you, she whispered. The fire crackled behind them. The children slept soundly in the next room. The wind outside carried the scent of earth and ash and promise. And though the road ahead still held fight and uncertainty, a choice had been made, not out of desperation, but out of quiet defiance. Out of love not yet spoken but clearly seen. The storm had returned. But this time, they would not face it alone. The final snow came late that spring, unannounced, like an old memory returning just when you thought you'd outgrown its reach. It fell in soft spirals, gentle and strange, laying a lace of white across the greening hills. It didn't stay long, but it was enough to remind everyone that the past, like winter, doesn't always retreat when asked. Sometimes it lingers, quiet and watchful, waiting for a weakness to return. Rachel stood by the window that morning, watching the snow dust the garden bed where sprouts had only just begun to show. Her breath left a small cloud on the glass, her fingers tucked tight into the sleeves of Sam's shirt, the one she'd started wearing on cold mornings. It didn't belong to her. But it didn't not belong to her either. Much like this place, this man, this new version of a life she'd never dared imagine. Behind her, the cabin was warm with the sounds of morning, wood popping in the stove, Finn arguing gently with Theo over who would feed the chickens, Sadie humming to her doll as she braided its yarn hair. Sam sat at the table, carving a small piece of ashwood into the shape of a bird mid-flight. He looked up once, just briefly, and caught Rachel's reflection in the window. She didn't turn, but she knew. The quiet was broken by the sound of hooves. Not just one. Several. They arrived not in anger, but in force, a thudding certainty across the half-frozen earth. Sam stood quickly, eyes narrowing. Rachel moved to the door before he could, her hand resting on the knob, heart already racing faster than her breath. Outside, Randall Byrne dismounted with a slow, calculated grace. He wore a coat he hadn't owned before, new, pressed, too clean for a man who lived hard. Behind him, two men in fine clothes stepped down from their horses. One held a briefcase. The other wore a judge's insignia pinned beneath his collar. The law had come with a stamp this time, not just the threat of it. Randall's smile widened as Sam stepped onto the porch beside Rachel. "Told you I'd be back." She didn't answer, didn't look away. The man with the briefcase opened it without a word and withdrew a thick document. "This is a ruling," he said flatly, "granted by the circuit judge after testimony provided in absentia by Mr. Byrne. It grants him immediate custodial rights to the children, pending further review. You are ordered to relinquish them into his care." Sam's hand tightened around the porch post. "They belong here." The judge himself stepped forward. His face bore the tired bureaucratic weight of a man who'd long ago stopped listening to truth in favor of structure. "We don't decide on heart," he said. "We decide on law. And by law, Mr. Byrne is the surviving father. You can challenge it, but not here. Not today." Rachel stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was clear. "These children haven't known safety until they knew this home. This man," she nodded to Sam, "has fed them, kept them warm, taught them what it means to be steady." "Steadiness," Randall scoffed. "That what you call hiding behind another man's roof?" Sam turned to him then, not with fire, but with something colder. "Older. I gave them a place to heal. Not to forget, but to grow." The judge sighed. "Ma'am, unless you have legal guardianship, you have no authority to object." "I'm their mother." "You're a woman without a husband," Randall cut in. "And this man is nothing to them." Sadie appeared on the porch before anyone noticed she'd slipped outside. She clutched her doll and stood between Sam and Rachel, her eyes wide and unblinking. "He is," she said. "He's everything." The silence that followed was unnatural, heavy. The judge hesitated, eyes narrowing. "I'm sorry," he said eventually, "but she's a child, and emotion doesn't overrule jurisdiction." The second man moved toward the door. Rachel stepped in front of him. Sam's voice came from behind her, steady. "We're going with you." All heads turned. Sam looked only at Randall. "You want to make your claim? You want to rip them away? Then do it in front of a proper court. With witnesses. With eyes. You want this to be legal. Make it public." Randall faltered, the crack in his swagger visible now. He hadn't planned for resistance wrapped in dignity. "You've got your ruling," Sam went on, "but I'll bring every soul from this town to testify what you are. I'll ride to Helena myself if I have to. And I won't stop." The judge's mouth twisted. "You challenging this?" "I'm invoking right of appeal under Homestead Sanctuary." There's precedent. You're not a blood relative. Sam nodded. I'm not. I'm something more. I chose them. The judge stared, then glanced at the lawyer, who shrugged with annoyance. He can file. It'll delay enforcement. Maybe a week. Then that's what we'll do, Sam said. The men conferred in low tones, clearly unhappy to be tangled in a matter no longer neat. Randall tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand. We'll reconvene in county court. 3 days' time. Until then, the children stay. They left without shaking hands. The snow had stopped by then. The porch remained crowded with the weight of what almost happened. Rachel turned to Sam. You knew the law? I learned it when I lost Abigail. There's a lot you read when you can't sleep. She looked down at Sadie, still clutching her doll. Then up again. You stood in front of him. You put yourself between us. I will again, Sam said. As long as you let me. The fire inside had gone low. Sam tended it while Rachel sat with the children, brushing hair back from their faces, whispering that they were safe. For now. For tonight. Sam looked around the cabin as the fire grew. He saw the carved creatures on the mantel, the drawing Theo had taped to the wall, the boots lined by the door, still caked in yesterday's mud. This place wasn't just his anymore. That night, he laid a fresh log on the flames and pulled something from beneath the table, the cradle. He'd kept working on it in secret. Unfinished for months, it had rested in the shadows, waiting. He placed it near the hearth. Rachel saw it. Her breath caught. You made that, she said, voice hushed. For what might come. You still think we'll need it? I don't think anything, Sam said. I just hope. She moved to the cradle, ran her fingers over its smooth edge. I'm afraid, she said. I've lived a long time with the kind of fear that hides in your bones. I know, he replied. But fear isn't all you're made of. She looked up at him, eyes soft and shining. You believe that? I do. Then she said something he hadn't expected. Not because it was loud or bold, but because it was hers. Then I believe it too. The trial came quickly. They rode to town as a family, not declared, not defined by blood, but by choice. The courtroom was small, but the pews were full. Mrs. Webb, Doc Hadley, and the pastor. Half the town came not for spectacle, but for truth. Randall wore his finest coat, but it couldn't disguise the hollowness behind his words. His arguments held structure but no soul. Rachel spoke only once. Quietly, clearly. I would rather live poor, live quiet, live alone with my children in a place that sees them than see them go with a man who sees only his own reflection in their eyes. Sam took the stand after her. I was lost when I found them, he said. Not because I needed saving, but because I had no one left to give to. Then they came. Hungry, cold, brave. And every day since, they've reminded me what it means to be alive. The judge listened, long and hard. Then gave his ruling. Custody granted to Rachel Byrne, full and permanent. Randall dismissed without right of further appeal. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Sam waited as Rachel hugged each child tight, kissed their foreheads one by one. Then she turned to him. The sun had broken through the clouds. Warm light fell over the steps. A breeze carried the scent of dust and lilac. She reached into her pocket and held out the wooden ring. I've carried this since the night you gave it to me, she said. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be offered something without conditions. He looked at her, steady. You don't owe me anything. I know, she said. But I'd like to offer you something too. She took his hand. I'd like to stay. Not just through the next storm. Not just to raise these children. But because when I look at you, I don't see rescue. I see home. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He only pulled her close, and she let him. That night, they sat by the hearth. The fire was bright. The cradle stood between them, rocking gently with a touch of wind through the open window. Sadie slept on the rug. Finn and Theo dozed against the far wall, arms tangled, breath even. Outside, the last snow melted into the earth. Inside, love, true and worn and rooted, grew without need for ceremony. And if you listen close, even now, you might hear it. Not thunder, not storm. Just the whisper of warmth against wood, the soft breath of a miracle born not in fire, but in kindness. And the creak of a cradle, swaying in time with the beat of something new.